is the psychological experience of an event or individual is not simply mysterious, but frightening in a way that feels oddly familiar. This phenomenon is used to describe incidents where a familiar thing or event is encountered in an unsettling, eerie, or taboo context. Ernst Jentsch set out the concept of the uncanny, later elaborated on by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, which explores the eeriness of dolls and waxworks. For Freud, the uncanny is located in the strangeness of the ordinary. Expanding on the idea, psychoanalytic theorist Jacques Lacan wrote that the uncanny places us in the field where we do not know how to distinguish bad and good, pleasure from displeasure, resulting in an irreducible anxiety that gestures to the real. The concept has since been taken up by a variety of thinkers and theorists such as roboticist Masahiro Mori's Uncanny Valley, and Julia Kristova's concept of abjection. The concept of the uncanny was later elaborated on and developed by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, or The Uncanny, which also draws on the work of Hoffmann, whom Freud refers to as the unrivaled master of the uncanny in literature. However, he criticizes Jentsch's belief that Olympia is the central uncanny element in the story The Sandman. I cannot think, and I hope most readers of the story will agree with me, that the theme of the doll Olympia, who is to all appearances a living being, is by any means the only, or indeed the most important, element that must be held responsible for the quite unparalleled atmosphere of uncanniness evoked by the story. Instead, Freud draws on a wholly different element of the story, namely, the idea of being robbed of one's eyes, as the more striking instance of uncanniness in the tale. He focuses on the eyes and their similarity to male castration anxiety in the remainder of his essay, and how this anxiety can lead to a male audience feeling the uncanny due to the idea of them being robbed of their masculinity, which is illustrated by Freud as a central contributor to male fear. Freud goes on, for the remainder of the essay, to identify uncanny effects that result from instances of repetition of the same thing, linking the concept to that of the repetition compulsion. He includes incidents wherein one becomes lost and accidentally retraces one's steps, and instances wherein random numbers recur, seemingly meaningfully. Here Freud may be said to be prefiguring the concept that Jung would later refer to as synchronicity. He also discusses the uncanny nature of Otto Rank's concept of the double. Freud specifically relates an aspect of the uncanny derived from German etymology. By contrasting the German adjective unheimlich with its base word heimlich, concealed, hidden, in secret, he proposes that social taboo often yields an aura not only of pious reverence but even more so of horror and even disgust, as the taboo state of an item gives rise to the commonplace assumption that that which is hidden from public eye, cf. The eye or sight metaphor, must be a dangerous threat and even an abomination, especially if the concealed item is obviously or presumably sexual in nature. Basically, the uncanny is what unconsciously reminds us of our own ID, our forbidden and thus repressed impulses, especially when placed in a context of uncertainty that can remind one of infantile beliefs in the omnipotence of thought. Such uncanny elements are perceived as threatening by our superego ridden with Oedipal guilt, as it fears symbolic castration by punishment for deviating from societal norms. Thus, the items and individuals that we project our own repressed impulses upon become a most uncanny threat to us, uncanny monsters and freaks akin to fairy tale folk devils, and subsequently often become scapegoats we blame for all sorts of perceived miseries, calamities, and maladies. What interests us most in this long extract is to find that among its different shades of meaning the word heimlich exhibits one which is identical with its opposite, unheimlich. What is heimlich thus comes to be unheimlich. Opening square bracket ... closing square bracket. In general, we are reminded that the word heimlich is not unambiguous, but belongs to two sets of ideas, which, without being contradictory, are yet very different. On the one hand it means what is familiar and agreeable, and on the other, what is concealed and kept out of sight. Unheimlich is customarily used, we are told, as the contrary only of the first signification of heimlich, and not of the second. Opening square bracket ... closing square bracket. On the other hand, we notice that Schelling says something which throws quite a new light on the concept of the unheimlich, for which we were certainly not prepared. According to him, everything is unheimlich that ought to have remained secret and hidden but has come to light. Opening square bracket ... closing square bracket. A study of dreams, fantasies and myths has taught us that anxiety about one's eyes, the fear of going blind, as used as a central theme in The Sandman, is often enough a substitute for the dread of being castrated. The self-blinding of the mythical criminal, Oedipus, was simply a mitigated form of the punishment of castration, the only punishment that was adequate for him by the lex talionis. Opening square bracket closing square bracket. All further doubts are removed when we learn the details of their castration complex from the analysis of neurotic patients and realize its immense importance in their mental life. 4. After Freud, Jacques Lacan, in his 1962-1963 seminar, L'angoisse, Anxiety, used the Unheimlich, via regia, to enter into the territory of angst. 10. Lacan showed how the same image that seduces the subject, trapping him in the narcissistic impasse, may suddenly, by a contingency, show that it is dependent on something, some hidden object, and so the subject may grasp at the same time that he is not autonomous. 5 December 1962. For example, and as a paradigm, Guy de Maupassant, in his story, La Horla, describes a man who suddenly may see his own back in the mirror. His back is there, but it is deprived of the gaze of the subject. It appears as a strange object, until he feels it is his own. There is no cognitive dissonance here, we rather cross all possible cognition, to find ourselves in the field where we do not know how to distinguish bad and good, pleasure from displeasure. And this is the signal of anxiety, the signal of the real, as irreducible to any signifier. General structure of the essay. Uncanny, divided into 3 sections. Definition of the uncanny, definitions of the term itself, the semantic field of the opposition of the German words Heimlich and unheimlich. Examination of ETA. Hoffmann's 1776-1822 short story, The Sandman, 1817, and a discussion of the psychoanalytic background and general context required for an understanding of the experience of the uncanny. Deliberations on the effect of the uncanny, in particular its aesthetic instantiation in literature and fiction. Note the prominence of the thematic of eyes and seeing in Freud's essay. Loss of eyes is fear of castration, evil eye is manifestation of uncanny, superego is double, and its function of self-observation. Freud picks up this theme from Hoffmann's story, which also has many motifs related to eyes and seeing. Definition of the uncanny. Aesthetics and psychoanalysis merged here. The uncanny is the subject of aesthetics. Why? Because it has to do with a certain kind of feeling or sensation, with emotional impulses. But in general, aesthetics has neglected to study the uncanny, preferring to concentrate on beauty and, generally, on more positive emotions, the attractive, the sublime, etc. The uncanny is something fearful and frightening, and as such it has been neglected in the history of aesthetics. But modernism marks a turn in its aesthetics in general toward a fascination with the ugly, the grotesque, a kind of negative aesthetics. Freud's essay makes a contribution to this supplement to the aesthetics of the beautiful, by examining what we might call the aesthetics of the fearful, the aesthetics of anxiety. Freud will wed psychoanalytic and aesthetic modes of thought to develop his theory of the uncanny. The theory remains incomplete if it fails to regard both of these. It is important to keep in mind here that Freud interprets beauty in general as an inhibited aim, that is, as a sublimated reflection or manifestation of our erotic instincts and impulses. See in this regard the Freud Reader, p. 193. This essay provides a brilliant example, perhaps the most stunning one in all of Freud's works, of the intertwining of psychoanalysis with another discipline, here, literary criticism. In this essay Freud plays the part of a literary critic who tries to explain the effect of a certain kind of literature. He is concerned with literary reception. Coherent with this literary orientation is the fact that he begins his analysis with philological considerations, the meaning of the word, uncanny, unheimlich, its etymology, history, historical development, general use, etc. What is the uncanny? Uncanny, p. 195. Freud's definition equals uncanny as the class of frightening things that leads us back to what is known and familiar. Freud's aim, to demonstrate psychoanalytically why this is the case. Only previous study of the uncanny equals that of Ernst Jentsch 1867, on the psychology of the uncanny, 1906 Jentsch's conclusions, 1. Uncanny equals fear of the unfamiliar, 2. Uncanny equals based on intellectual uncertainty. Freud will take issue with both of these propositions. Study of the German words, Heimlich and unheimlich, canny, homey, uncanny, unhomey. Heimlich, first definition equals a, belonging to the house, friendly, familiar, b, tame, as in animals. C, intimate, comfortable, i.e., secure, domestic, aided, hospitable. Heimlich, second definition equals concealed, secret, withheld from sight and from others, secretive, deceitful equals private. Note the dialectic of these meanings, summarized on page 200. What from the perspective of the one who is, at home, is familiar, is to the outsider, the stranger, the very definition of the unfamiliar, the secretive, the impenetrable. The term Heimlich embodies the dialectic of privacy and intimacy that is inherent in bourgeois ideology. Therefore Freud can associate it with the private parts, the parts of the body that are the most intimate, and that are simultaneously those parts subject to the most concealment. Cp. 200. However, in Freud's understanding the Heimlich will also be something that is concealed from the self. Unheimlich. As the negation of Heimlich, this word usually only applies to the first set of meanings listed above. Unheimlich equals unhomey, unfamiliar, untame, uncomfortable equals eerie, weird, etc. Unheimlich 2, the less common variant, equals unconcealed, unsecret, what is made known, what is supposed to be kept secret but is inadvertently revealed. Note the implicit connection of this notion of the unheimlich to Freud's concept of parapraxis, the inadvertent slip of the tongue that reveals a hidden truth. Skelling's definition p. 199 Unheimlich is the name for everything that ought to have remained secret and hidden but has come to light. Unheimlich thus becomes a kind of unwilling, mistaken self-exposure. In psychoanalytic terms, it provides a surprising and unexpected self-revelation. Freud concentrates on the unusual semantics of these two terms. Heimlich equals known, familiar, unheimlich equals unknown, unfamiliar. Heimlich 2 equals secret, unknown, unheimlich 2 equals revealed, uncovered. For a diagram of the complex semantic dynamics and oppositions Freud associates with these terms, click here. The word Heimlich thus has a meaning that overlaps with its opposite, unheimlich. The semantics of this word come full circle. Freud's thesis, unheimlich, the uncanny equals revelation of what is private and concealed, of what is hidden, hidden not only from others, but also from the self. In Freudian terminology, the uncanny is the mark of the return of the repressed. See, Uncanny, 217. 3. ETA, Hoffman's, The Sandman, and the Psychoanalytic Elements of the Uncanny. ETA, Hoffman's, The Sandman, and the Psychoanalytic Elements of the Uncanny. Jentsch's theory of the automaton, he sees the undecidability of the inanimate-animate opposition as one source of the uncanny. In Hoffman's story this is embodied in the robotic woman Olympia. Jentsch sees this as the uncanny kernel of this text. Freud disagrees. He claims the source of the uncanny in this tale is the eponymous figure of the Sandman himself. The Sandman is a mythic figure who tears out children's eyes. Storyline of Hoffman's, The Sandman. 1. Nathaniel, the protagonist, is warned as a child about the Sandman. The eerie Coppelius comes to conduct experiments with Nathaniel's father. Nathaniel sees Coppelius and associates him with the Sandman. Nathaniel is discovered as he observes Coppelius and his father conducting alchemical experiments. Coppelius wants to burn his eyes out, but the father saves him. Nathaniel's father is later killed by an explosion during one of Coppelius's visits. 2. As a student, Nathaniel meets the optician Coppola, from whom he buys a spy glass. Nathaniel falls in love with the automaton Olympia, whom he sees through this glass. Olympia has been produced by Spallanzani, double of the father, and Coppola, the double of Coppelius. Nathaniel observes how the two fight over the automaton and the eyes are pulled out of the robot's head. This fight between the two fathers repeats the fight that Coppelius and Nathaniel's father had over Nathaniel himself, when he was discovered spying on their experiments. Note the significance of the structure of doubling in this story. We saw something similar in Kafka's Country Doctor. Nathaniel falls into a state of insanity. 3. Nathaniel recovers, and he is about to marry his fiancée Clara. They ascend the tower of the town hall and Nathaniel sees Coppelius through his spy glass. He goes insane again and tries to kill Clara. Her brother rescues her, but Nathaniel jumps off the tower to his death. The spyglass is a kind of symbol for the revelation of a hidden secret, for a tool that makes the Heimlich secret unheimlich unsecret. It allows Nathaniel to penetrate into the sphere of the private, but also to gain access to the repressed parts of his own past. Freud's interpretation. 1. Freud stresses the uncertainty of whether the events the narrator relates to us are real or imaginary. For uncanny fiction, this ambivalence will become decisive. This is Freud's version of Genscher's intellectual uncertainty. 2. For Freud, the source of the uncanny is tied to the idea of being robbed of one's eyes. Why? Here Freud turns to the experience of the psychoanalyst. In dreams, myths, neurotic fantasies, etc., loss of the eyes equals fear of castration. In The Sandman, Coppelius, the bad father, interferes with all love relationships. He is the powerful, castrating father who kills the good father who first protects Nathaniel's eyes. 3. The uncanny thus marks the return of the familiar in the sense of our psychic economy, in which nothing is ever lost or wholly forgotten. It is the castration complex as part of our infantile sexuality genital phase that is re-invoked by the fear of loss of the eyes in this story. What is uncanny here is thus the return of something in our psychosexual history that has been overcome and forgotten. Freud's first thesis. The uncanny arises due to the return of repressed infantile material. 4 other examples of this. The double doppelganger, its source is the primary narcissism of the child, its self-love. In early childhood this produces projections of multiple selves. By doing this the child ensures her immortality. But when it is encountered later in life, after childhood narcissism has been overcome, the double invokes a sensation of the uncanny equals a return to a primitive state. 5. But Freud also relates the double to the formation of the superego. The superego projects all the things it represses onto this primitive image of the double. Hence the double in later life is experienced as something uncanny because it calls forth all this repressed content. Alternative meanings for this form of the double. A. It represents everything that is unacceptable to the ego, all its negative traits that have been suppressed. Or B. It embodies all those utopian dreams, wishes, hopes that are suppressed by the reality principle, by the encounter with society. C. Uncanny, 211-212. This aspect of Freud's theory will become important for our interpretation of Hofmannsthal's A Tale of the Cavalry. WHYSTHEDOPPLGANGERTHEPARADIGMOFTHEUNCANNY. It represents a psychic, nodal point, with multiple implications, meanings, sources, etc. Ambivalence. The double doubled. The fact that an agency of this kind, the superego, exists, which is able to treat the rest of the ego like an object, the fact, that is, that man is capable of self-observation, renders it possible to invest the old idea of a double with a new meaning and to ascribe many things to it, above all, those things which seem to self-criticism to belong to the old surmounted narcissism of earlier times. But it is not only this latter material, offensive as it is to the criticism of the ego, which may be incorporated in the idea of a double. There are also all the unfulfilled but possible futures to which we still like to cling in fantasy, all the strivings of the ego which adverse circumstances have crushed. The uncanny, 211-12, emphasis added. This aspect of Freud's theory will become important for our interpretation of Hofmannsthal's A Tale of the Cavalry. Freud's general thesis. The uncanny is anything we experience in adulthood that reminds us of earlier psychic stages, of aspects of our unconscious life, or of the primitive experience of the human species. A. Castration. B. Double. C. Involuntary repetition, the compulsion to repeat Wiederholungszwang as a structure of the unconscious. D. Animistic conceptions of the universe equals the power of the psyche. It sees itself as stronger than reality, e.g. telepathy, mind over matter. These are common conceptions of primitive life. The uncanny arises as the recurrence of something long forgotten and repressed, something superseded in our psychic life equals a reminder of our psychic past. IV. The uncanny in literature, in narrative fiction. A. Freud is not entirely satisfied with his own conclusion. Not everything that returns from repression is uncanny. Return of the repressed is a necessary condition for the uncanny, but not a sufficient one. Something else must also be at play here in order to create the experience of the uncanny. B. To understand this, Freud returns to the study of fiction for help. Here we find the two sources of the uncanny, its relation to the psychic past, confirmed. 1. Uncanny equals revival of repressed infantile material equals part of individual psychic reality. 2. Uncanny equals confirmation or return of surmounted primitive beliefs of the human species, such as animism, etc. C. But Freud asks why our experience of the uncanny in our real-life experiences and in fiction are different. His answer, we know it already. Equals fantasy is different from reality because it does not undergo reality testing. Therefore, events that would be uncanny if experienced in real life are not experienced as such in fiction. Fairy tales, for example, give many instances of uncanny events that are not experienced by the reader as uncanny. Why? The readers adjust their sensibility to the fictional world. C. Uncanny, 227. In other words, since uncanny events seem normal in the fairy tale world, and we adjust our expectations to the normal state of this fictional reality, we as readers do not gain a sense of the uncanny. Or, we might say, since the characters in the fictional world of fairy tales do not see fantastic events as unusual or uncanny, but take them as a matter of course, the reader also is not led to find these things out of the ordinary for the depicted world. Fiction only creates an uncanny effect if the author makes a pretense to realism, if we as readers believe that real, actual conditions are being narrated. The experience of the uncanny in literature depends on the discrepancy between real events and fantastic occurrences in the fictional world. The author promises truth and verisimilitude, but then breaks this promise. C. Uncanny, 227. We, as readers of the fiction, must share the perspective of the character who experiences the uncanny event in the fictional world. C. Uncanny, 229, the example of the severed hand. In Hoffman's The Sandman, the narrator makes us look through the spyglass Nathaniel buys from Coppola Coppelius, the demon optician. C. Uncanny, 205-206. V. Summary of the qualities of uncanny fiction. A. Focuses on one central character equals the anchor character. Events, people, etc. in the fictional world only have significance in relation to this character. It forms the hub, or center of all events. B. External events are seen through the perspective of the anchor character and colored by his or her psyche, they are projections of the psyche of this fictional character. C. The text thus takes on the quality of a dream text, with manifest and latent content. The real and the fantastic, Freud's required ambivalence, form a unity in the consciousness of the anchor character. This lends some of the events the shimmer of the symbolic because it is undecidable whether they are real or imagined. D. Stylistically, uncanny fiction requires a fusion of objective and subjective narrative styles. We commonly find a realistic frame, which reads like a report or a newspaper article, which is suddenly ruptured by fantastic events. But this rupture is also related with the accuracy and detail of objective narration. E. The reader's perspective must be that of the anchor character, events must be perceived through his/her eyes, filtered through the psyche of this character. Only when all of these conditions are met is the experience of the uncanny transferred from the domain of the fictional world to the receptive experience of the reader.